I was the best man. The bride pulled me aside before the vows and whispered 2 words. The bride pulled me aside 90 seconds before she was supposed to marry my best friend. She did it the way you do something you've already lost the argument with yourself about. Fast, before the more sensible version of you can catch your hand. Her grip closed around my sleeve. Somewhere near her wrist a small brass bell rang once, the way it always did, and she pulled me through a side door into a room that smelled like cold coffee and floor polish and the particular silence of a building waiting for an organ to start. She leaned in. Her breath touched the side of my face. And she said 2 words. 2 words I had spent 11 years making sure I would never have to hear. Because hearing them meant I'd been wrong about the one thing I had built my whole careful life around being right about. I should probably explain how a man ends up holding the rings for the wedding he'd give anything to stop. My name is Eli Marsh. I'm 34. I fix furniture for a living. Old chairs, water-ruined tables. The kind of pieces people carry in like wounded animals and set on my workbench and say please before they've even said hello. I'm good at it. I can take something that wobbles and lies to you about being beyond saving and make it hold weight again. I've just never been any good at noticing when the broken thing is me. Her name was Nora. She came into my shop 6 years ago with a dining chair that had no business still existing. One leg held on with a bread tie and what looked like sheer stubbornness, and she set it down and said, "Don't tell me it's not worth fixing. I already know. Fix it anyway." It had been her grandmother's. So was the bell. A small, loud, ridiculous brass bell she kept on her keyring because her grandmother had clipped it there to find her in crowds, and Nora had never taken it off. Which meant you always heard Nora before you saw her. You heard her coming. I would later decide this was the single cruelest design flaw of my entire life. We became friends the way 2 people do when one of them is quietly fixing the other one's grief and pretending it's a chair. And somewhere in those 8 months of sanding and gluing and her sitting on my workbench eating my lunch without asking, I fell. Quietly. Completely. The way I do everything, without telling anyone, including myself. Then I introduced her to Theo. Theo is my oldest friend, and he is a genuinely good man, which I want on the record before I tell you the rest. I introduced them at a backyard thing in June because I had decided she deserved someone uncomplicated, someone who would never make her cry over a chair. I told myself I was being generous, that I was handing them to each other like a gift. That is cowardice with better branding, but I wouldn't learn to say it that plainly for another 6 years. The crack came the night before the wedding, in a hotel kitchen at almost midnight, over a cake. I'd gone down for water because best men don't sleep. They lie in dark rooms rehearsing a speech they're afraid to mean. The kitchen lights were off except the one over the steel counter, and the whole room smelt like buttercream and refrigerator hum, and Nora was standing in front of the cake in a hotel robe with a fork in her hand. Not eating it. Just looking at it. 3 tiers of someone else's idea of forever. I heard the bell before I saw her turn. Of course I did. You're going to dent the frosting, I said. I'm thinking about it, she said. She didn't look up. How much trouble would I be in? We talked the way we always talked. Fast, dry, the rhythm of 2 people who'd long ago stopped explaining themselves to each other. She told me she couldn't sleep. I told her nobody sleeps the night before, that it's normal, that tomorrow she'd be glad. She nodded at all of it. I found a second fork in the drawer and stood next to her, and we quietly ruined the bottom tier of her wedding cake together, one small bite at a time, like vandals with excellent taste. It was the best thing I'd eaten in a year. I told her so. She told me to shut up. Standard service. For about 90 seconds, it was just the fridge humming, and 2 forks, and the easiest silence I knew. And I let myself sit inside it, the way you warm your hands at a fire you know is about to go out. And then there was a different silence, and into it she said, very lightly, like it weighed nothing, "You ever think about how the whole rest of your life is just the version you picked over all the other ones?" I should have said something easy. Instead, I watched her press the tines of the fork into the frosting and not take a bite, and I noticed. The way you notice a hairline split in a chair leg, the kind that means it'll fail the first time someone leans back, that she didn't look like a woman the night before the best day of her life. She looked like a woman bracing. She caught me seeing it and looked away too quickly. "Go to bed, Eli," she said. "Soft, big day." I went. But the line sat wrong in me for hours, the way a wrong note does, the version you picked over all the other ones, and I couldn't get it to lie flat. I told myself it was nerves. That's the thing I'm best at, after furniture. I told myself it was nerves, and I went up to my room and lay in the dark and rehearsed the speech where I call my best friend the luckiest man alive, and I almost believed all of it. Almost is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because lying there, I let myself do the thing I never let myself do, which is count. I counted the times over the years she'd texted me first when something good happened, before Theo, before her sister, before anyone. I counted the inside jokes that had no origin story either of us could explain. I counted the way she'd kept that chair in her front hall instead of the dining room, where everyone who walked in had to see it. The first thing she ever trusted me to save. None of it meant anything. I was very firm with myself about that. People can love each other 100 quiet ways that aren't that way, and I was an expert in those ways. I had a degree in them. That's hiding with better branding too. I'm just better at spotting it now. The evidence kept arriving anyway, the way it does once you've stopped refusing the package. The next morning, getting ready, Theo asked me to grab Nora's something blue from her bag, and I dug past the bell and the lipstick and found a folded square of paper soft from being opened too many times. I didn't read it. I'm not a complete disaster, but I saw enough to know it was old, and I saw the corner of my own handwriting. A note I'd left taped to that chair when she picked it up, 6 years ago. 3 words about how some things are worth the trouble, and I felt the floor of the morning tilt about 4 degrees. Then her sister, doing the buttons on the back of the dress, said to no one, "You used to talk about him like that, you know." And Nora said, "Who?" Too fast. And her sister said, "Never mind," and the room got quiet in a way that had nothing to do with weddings. Then, walking past the open door of the bridal suite, I heard her on the phone with someone, her voice low, saying, I know. It's just, he's the safe choice, and that's a real thing that counts for something." And she went still when she saw me in the doorway. Just still. Not dramatically. Her fingers tightened once around the bell on her keys, and it didn't ring, and somehow that was louder than if it had. I gave her a thumbs up like an idiot and kept walking, because I had poor survival instincts around exactly one woman on this earth, and the day she was marrying someone else seemed like a poor time to develop better ones. 10 minutes before the ceremony, they sent me to bring her the bouquet, because the florist had left it in the wrong room, and I was the only man in the building not doing something useful with his hands. She was alone when I came in. Dressed. Finished. Ready. Standing at the window with her back to me in all that white, the afternoon light coming through the glass and laying itself across her shoulders, the old radiator ticking, the room thick with hairspray and lilies. I stopped in the doorway. She heard the latch and turned. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all, because there was no safe sentence anywhere in the room and we both knew it. I held the bouquet out. She didn't take it. She just looked at me, held my eyes 1 second longer than felt safe, then a second past that, until the holding itself had become the most honest thing either of us had done in 11 years. Her hand drifted to the keys on the windowsill. The bell rang once, small, like punctuation at the end of a sentence neither of us would say. I watched her throat move. I watched her decide not to speak. And I memorized her, all of her. The way you do something you're certain you're about to lose, and I told myself this was what loving someone properly looked like, standing very still, in a doorway, wanting nothing out loud. When she finally took the flowers, her fingers brushed mine and stayed a beat too long. "You'd tell me," she said, not looking at me, "if I was about to do something stupid, wouldn't you?" It wasn't really a question. It was the first true thing wearing a disguise. So I told the bravest and most cowardly lie of my life. "You've never done a stupid thing in your life, Nora," I said, and I left the room, because I couldn't stand in it one more second without telling her the truth. And the truth still wasn't mine to tell. Not unless she asked for it. Not unless she asked first. And then it was time. There's a moment before a wedding starts when everyone is in their places and the music hasn't begun, and the whole building holds its breath, and I was standing at the front in a suit that fit, holding 2 rings that weren't mine to hold, watching the doors at the end of the aisle. Theo was beside me. He squeezed my shoulder. "Couldn't do this without you," he said, and meant it. And I hated myself with a precision I'd been saving up for years. I didn't look at the doors. I looked at the floor, at the toes of my rented shoes, and I told myself the thing I'd told myself for 11 years, the sentence that had organized my entire adult life: "You don't get to want this, so stop." And that's when I heard the bell. Not from the doors, from the side. Close, her hand on my sleeve, her grip already deciding things, and the side door, and the smell of cold coffee and floor polish, and her breath against the side of my face. "It's you," she whispered. 2 words. I went completely still. The kind of still where your body understands something a half second before your mind agrees to it, where everything in your chest pulls in toward one point and the room goes far away. The bell had stopped ringing. Her hand was shaking against my arm. I could hear, through the door, the first 3 notes of the music she was supposed to be walking down the aisle to. "Nora." My voice came out wrong. "Nora, you're getting married in 90 seconds. I know what I'm doing in 90 seconds. Her eyes were too bright, and her chin was doing the thing it did when she was about to be brave or stupid and hadn't decided which. I just needed one person in this building to know the truth before I... Stop. I caught her hand. Held it. The keys, the bell, all of it, in my fist with hers. "Listen to me. You can walk back out that door right now. Theo's at the end of the aisle, and he loves you, and not one person out there ever has to know this happened. I will stand exactly where I always stand. I'll hold the rings. I'll give the speech. You can have the whole safe version, and I will never ever bring this up again." I had to stop. My throat wasn't working right. "That door's open, Nora. I'm not going to be the reason it closes." She didn't move toward it. She looked at our hands instead, hers inside mine, and she said, "Quiet. The biggest things are always the quietest. You taped a note to my chair. 6 years ago. I never told you I kept it." Her fingers tightened. "I've read it more times than I've read anything else I own. And every time something good has happened to me since, you're the one I want to tell first, before I've even decided to be happy about it. and I've been calling that friendship for so long that I almost convinced myself I could put on a white dress and keep calling it that for the rest of my life. She looked up at me. It was never the chair I couldn't throw away. I should have said something graceful. What I said was the truest thing I had, which I'd never once let out of my mouth. Every person I've ever sat across from felt like a room I was passing through. You're the only one who ever felt like a place I could put something down and trust it would still be there when I came back. I breathed. I didn't give you to him to be generous. I gave you away because I was a coward, and I have regretted it every single day. And I would rather lose you honestly today than keep you as a lie for 50 years. For a moment, she didn't answer. Her thumb moved once across the back of my hand and found the old callus there. The one I've had for 11 years from holding tools instead of holding her. On the other side of the door, the music swelled and then looped patiently back to the beginning, certain I was about to walk her down to it. I waited for her to take the exit. I'd built it carefully. I'd left it standing open on purpose. She reached past me and pushed the door shut. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something breaking open. And she pressed her forehead to mine, and for one breath neither of us said anything. The bell silent between our hands. The whole impossible day waiting outside the door. I did not kiss her. I want that on the record too. There's a version of this where I kiss her and we run. And it's not this one, because she was still wearing his ring on her hand, and I am not the man who takes the things somebody else hasn't put down yet. The knock came right then, fast, panicked, and the wedding planner's voice. "Pitched high, Nora?" "Nora, we're honey, we have to." Nora pulled back, wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, smearing a morning's worth of someone else's careful work. And she laughed, wet and wrecked and entirely herself. "Well," she said, "I'm about to ruin a very expensive afternoon." "Yeah," I said. "You are." "Stay where you always stand," she said. "I have to go do the brave thing now. Not for you." She put her hand flat on my chest for a second, just to feel it, I think. For me. Or it doesn't count. And she went out to do it. Without me. Which is the only way it would have ever been worth anything. She didn't marry Theo that day. I won't pretend the next hour was clean, because nothing honest ever is. There were tears that weren't romantic, and 100 guests rerouted to a buffet they'd already paid for, and a conversation between Nora and Theo behind a closed door that I had the decency to stand far away from. Theo was hurt in the deep, quiet way good men are hurt, and he didn't speak to either of us for a long time. And he was right not to. The last thing he said to me that day, in the parking lot, was, "I wish you'd told me when it would have cost less." He wasn't wrong. Some things you don't get to come out of looking good, and you take that as the price of finally telling the truth. 3 months later, Nora and I had our first dinner that we both admitted out loud was a dinner. It was excruciating. We'd been honest with each other for years about everything except the one thing, and now the one thing was on the table and neither of us knew how to hold a fork around it. She knocked her water over. I said something idiotic about the structural integrity of the table. We were terrible at it. We were so relieved to be terrible at it together. A year after that, she moved her grandmother's chair into my front hall, where everyone who comes in has to see it. I'd fixed it so well by then, you'd never know it had been broken. She likes to point that out to guests. "He's good at that," she says, taking the thing everyone's given up on and making it hold. And then she looks at me a beat too long, and I have to leave the room. She still texts me first when something good happens, before she's even decided to be happy about it. I still read her silences like there'll be a test at the end. Nothing about either of us has really changed. The only difference is that now When she heads out the door and the bell goes off down the hallway, I don't have to pretend the sound of it does something small to me. Theo, for what it's worth, got married 2 years later to someone who looks at him the way I could never make myself look at Nora. He invited us. We went. He shook my hand at the end of the night and held it a second longer than he had to, and that was the whole apology, both directions, and it was enough. Years later, when people ask Nora how we finally got together, she doesn't tell them about the dinners or the slow part, or any of the sensible reasons two adults end up choosing each other. She tells them I was the best man at her wedding to somebody else, and she pulled me into a back room 90 seconds before the vows, and she whispered 2 words. And when they ask what I was thinking, in that room, with her ring still on her hand and the music already playing, I tell them the truth. I was thinking that I'd heard that bell coming toward me for 6 years, and I'd spent every one of them telling myself it was ringing for someone else. It wasn't new. It had probably always been mine. It had just finally stopped hiding. So here's what I want to know. What would you have done if the person about to make the biggest mistake of their life pulled you aside and told you the truth, 90 seconds before it was too late? Would you have opened the door for them, or held it shut? And have you ever loved someone quietly for years and called your silence kindness, when you knew, somewhere underneath, that it was only fear in a nicer coat? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.